Hey folks, this is Jesse Cope back with another episode of the American Soul Podcast. Hope y'all are doing well wherever y'all are, whatever part of the day you're in, whether it's laundry or dishes or changing diapers or driving to and from work or maybe driving as your work or sitting on the porch or at the dining room table or taking a walk, conference period, getting dressed in the morning and putting makeup on or whatever else it is that you're doing. I appreciate you giving me a little bit of your time. For those of y'all that continue to share the podcast and tell others about it, had a pretty good month so far, and it's early on as far as downloads have gone. So, and for those of y'all that have joined over on Patreon and are getting the extra podcasts, I'm incredibly grateful and humbled by it, and I will try to use your time wisely. I don't think I have a whole lot else to report. Most of the kids around the country have heard from some of y'all or in different schools around the country. I think most of the kids are back. We're definitely going to talk about education. We do pretty consistently because it's such a huge part of solving this problem that we've gotten ourselves into in the nation. And I think that's about it. Oh, we had to take our Christmas tree down. And that was just gnashing of teeth, brokenhearted. And I'm probably the ringleader. I don't give my wife much support when it comes to taking the tree down. Big fan of putting it up. I'm not too keen on taking it down. That's the problem with live trees, though. One of the benefits of having a fake tree, right? You get to leave it up until you decide you don't want to anymore. Of course, in my case, the problem would be I'd probably leave it up all the time. All right, we're going to talk for the next probably 2 or 3 days uh, about a concept. And we're going to go through a few people. Simon Greenleaf, we're going to spend a good chunk of time on him. Talk about Noah Webster a little, who we've talked about often, maybe a quote or two from President Truman, maybe John Adams. We'll just see how far we get. The deal is, in America, we've allowed this lie to come in of separation of church and state. And everything really does stem from that, because what that is, in its essence, is rejection of God. Why is that such a big problem? Why is that the problem in America? Because this is a Christian nation. It was founded that way. You can say, well, it's not today, and there's a lot of argument. You'd be right in a lot of ways, but it's founded that way. Principally, it works that way. That's why the modern Antifa, BLM, leftist, just in general feminist argument about America being systemically racist, sexist, bigoted is just such a flat lie. Systemically, institutionally, our republic was founded against each of those very bigotries, prejudices. That's the system. That's the republic. Those are the way the institutions were founded and framed. And let's just go ahead and get this out of the way, because you hear it all the time. I'm sure I'm going to get a couple comments. Slavery. No, the country was not founded on slavery. Uh, the majority, the Project 1619 is just absolute fabrication. Should not be used in public education today at all. In the in the sense of the agenda, the ideology that it's trying to push, right? I'm sure they have some factual numbers or quotes in there, but to say that America was based on slavery ignores the fact that there were a huge chunk of Americans that were against slavery from the very beginning as well. And so what's really at the heart of this comment, right? It's not even really slavery, which is sad because that's an important part of our history. Really, it's just racism. It's just straight up racism. And it's the entitlement mentality and and just gosh, so many bad things rolled into one. And that's probably a whole nother podcast or two or 20. But the point is when we go back to our founding, ideologically, systemically, institutionally, our country was founded as a Christian republic based on the Bible. So our laws go together hand in hand with faith, with the Christian faith in particular, specifically, not Islam, not Buddhism, Hinduism, atheism, Mother Natureism, statism, none of that other stuff, specifically with Christianity. And so we're going to talk about that connection for a few days, and we're going to start with your man, Simon Greenleaf. He's a Royal Professor of Law at Harvard, succeeded Justice Joseph Story, who we've talked about here on the podcast before, as the Dane Professor of Law. Between these two is ascribed the Harvard Law School, the rise to its eminent position among the legal schools of the United States. That's just a little inset from America's God and Country Encyclopedia. I try to, because I use these sources pretty heavily, even though I haven't for the last couple months. Throughout the rest of the year, I lean on them pretty heavily, and they're wonderful resources. I would recommend highly that you get a copy of each one, a hard copy, maybe two, in your own house. They should be the primary textbooks in every classroom of public education across the United States. Should be a requirement for them to be in the classroom and used, both at the K through 12 and any college, university level organizations that receive public taxpayer money. This is, again, out of America's God and Country Encyclopedia. Greenleaf wrote a treatise on the law of evidence, still considered to be the greatest single authority of evidence of all the literature on legal procedure. And this is a quote about Greenleaf by Supreme Court or Chief Justice Fuller, describing Greenleaf, saying, "He is the highest authority in our courts." And so we're going to read some of his comments. This first one is correspondence with the American Bible Society in Cambridge, November 6th, 1852. "Of the divine character of the Bible, I think no man who deals honestly with his own mind and heart can entertain a reasonable doubt. For myself, I must say that having for many years made the evidences of Christianity the subject of close study, the result has been a firm and increasing conviction of the authenticity and plenary inspiration of the Bible. It is indeed the Word of God." A couple of modern cases that are a little more approachable, maybe. There is a book written by David Limbaugh, who I can't remember the title of right now, where he goes through the case for Christianity. And then there's a real famous number of works by a man named Lee Strobel. And one that I'm thinking of primarily called The Case for Christ, in which he kind of goes through and talks about his path from an atheist or at best agnostic, but certainly no friend of Christianity, and his process of deciding, you know what, I'm going to go prove this wrong, and in the process became a Christian. And you see a similar trajectory with C.S. Lewis, If you go and read some of his writings, he talks about, there's a real pretty famous quote that he made, and I can't quote it off the top of my head, but it was something like, no man wanted to be a Christian any less than I did. And I was drugged into the realm of heaven kicking and screaming. And so, just a couple little sources. I can't remember the book name. I'm sorry right now for C.S. Lewis, where he probably talks about in a couple places. I've read it off and on throughout the years. But if you're looking for that and you really want to see somebody that went in with a very hostile view of Christianity, trying to do the research with the particular idea of proving it wrong, Lee Strobel is a great resource, phenomenal resource. But so Greenleaf here, and this is a guy, again, that was quoted by one of our chief justices as the highest authority in our courts, and was one of the reasons that Harvard, who used to be a phenomenal school, one of our preeminent schools, its rise as far as the law side was concerned. So, and here he is saying the Bible is the Word of God. So this is a section from his treatise on the law of evidence. If a close examination of the evidences of Christianity may be expected of one class of men more than another, it would seem incumbent upon lawyers who make the law of evidence one of our peculiar studies. Our profession leads us to explore the mazes of falsehood, to detect its artifices, to pierce its thickest veils, to follow and expose its sophistries, to compare the statements of different witnesses with severity, to discover truth and separate it from error. And so just throw this in, I'm not sure we're going to get to it today. We're just kind of setting a background for the next couple days, in particular with Greenleaf talking about how much evidence there is for Christianity, particularly because this is coming from one of our great legal minds and from early on in the life of the Republic, right? He lived from 1783 to 1853. The religion of Jesus Christ not only solicits the grave attention of all to whom its doctrines are presented, but it demands their cordial belief as a matter of vital concernment. These are no ordinary claims, and it seems hardly possible for a rational being to regard them with even a subdued interest, much less to treat them with mere indifference and contempt. If not true, they are little else than the pretensions of a bold impostor. But if they are well founded, and just they can be, no, let me start over here. Interject one thing real quick. So this is C.S. Lewis's argument also, right? So you hear often today from people that Jesus Christ was a good teacher. And Lewis crushes that argument pretty quickly because Jesus Christ openly claims to be God. And so he says, so either he's crazy, like somebody that thinks that they're a poached egg or something. I mean, that kind of insanity. Or he's the devil himself because he knows he's not God and yet he's claiming to be. Or he's actually exactly who he says he is and he's God. Those are your three choices. A good moral teacher is just simply not one of them because no good man would make these claims. No good moral teacher would make these claims to be God. So get back into Greenleaf's treatise on the law of evidence. But if they are well founded and just, they can be no less than the high requirements of heaven, addressed by the voice of God to the reason and understanding of man. Such was the estimate taken of religion, even the religion of pagan Rome, by one of the greatest lawyers of antiquity, when he argued that it was either nothing at all or everything. And I can't read the Latin here. folks. I apologize. I'm not even going to try to, although y'all would be entertained by it. God, that's one of the things that we have done a real poor job on. We talk about education, and we stuff our kids. We force kids that shouldn't be in school to stay in school for too long, right? And so then what we try and do to make ourselves feel better is we try and add all these accommodations and extra things in to level the playing field. That's what we say. We're really not leveling the playing field. We're making it extremely unlevel by giving certain kids added benefits that we don't give to others and then pretending that we're grading them all on the same scale, pretending that they're the same, right? But one of the problems that forces when we force kids to come to school, particularly uh, high school, right? Maybe junior high, but high school in particular, and force this idea that they have to go to college. So we send a lot of them on to college that definitely should not go. What it does is that it forces us to water down the curriculum because we're dealing with a bigger and bigger pool with lower and lower capabilities academically. Doesn't mean, folks, let me go ahead and, because I'm sure I'll get some hate for this too. That doesn't mean these people are of less value. It doesn't mean that they're worthless, that they're worthless, right? It doesn't mean any of that. It's just like the argument about men and women being the same. We're not the same. We're never going to be the same. We were never intended to be the same. We weren't created the same. We have different strengths and weaknesses. We shouldn't pretend, right? Co-ed military units, prime example, or first responder units, whether it's police, firefighters, etc. We shouldn't pretend that men and women have to be the same to be equally valuable. That's not true. And we do the same thing with our students. We pretend, well, everybody's got to get a high school degree in order to be valuable. Everybody, well, more and more and more ought to go to college in order to be valuable. You really want to be valuable, right? And that's just such a huge lie. And it has a number of problems. But so you come back to this. The reason I got off on that was the Latin. We used to teach uh, Latin and foreign languages much better, more intensely than we do, especially the older ones, right? French, I'm not saying that's an old language, folks. This just shows my ignorance right here, but just we don't teach those liberal arts facets anymore because we can't. You can't teach those things to the masses. It's like trying to teach calculus or physics to the masses. It's not going to work, right? And even some of the lower stuff that we do try and teach, right? Whether you're talking about super upper level English or a foreign language or science courses in general, and you say, well, everybody has to take this and pass it. And so what you do is you end up forcing the curriculum to be less and less, and then we end up not knowing little bits and pieces. We end up dumbing down our kids that have more ability. And we're not helping the kids that have less academic ability at all because we're trying to force them to do stuff that has no relevance on the rest of their life. Let me see how much time I got left here. Oh, Lord. Let me read one more paragraph and then we'll move on for today. Reference to the apostles. Greenleaf said they had every possible motive to review carefully the grounds of their faith and the evidence of the great facts and truths which they asserted. And their writings show them to have been men of vigorous understandings. If then their testimony was not true, there was no possible motive for this fabrication. And so you see this running through all these comments about Greenleaf, who was one of our great legal minds. This truth of Christianity, and this was early on in our founding, in our republic. And so there's this idea among, and it wasn't just him, you can go back and look at Joseph Story's comments also, who also happened to be at Harvard, right? This intense belief in Christianity as the basis, as truth, And so this idea today that they would suddenly say, oh, well, we can't have any of that in government seems that's just beyond ridiculous. Why would you have people that helped create the laws, like John Jay, our first Supreme Court Chief Justice, that said we had a responsibility to elect Christians as our leaders? Why would you have these kind of comments? And at the same time, those people, right, are the very first act of the Continental Congress. And then at the same time, these people say, oh, but we want to kick God and Jesus Christ out of the law. And that has nothing to do with freedom of religion, with the ability of an American citizen to choose no faith or any faith. The fact that the country has to have God and Jesus Christ at the center of their laws, at the center of our public policy, at the center of our institutions, systemically, is a completely separate argument. So we'll come back the next day or two, and we're going to kind of talk about this relationship that Greenleaf, Noah Webster again, probably talk about him, and a couple others, what the relationship is between this faith and law in the country. Sure do appreciate y'all joining me again. God bless y'all. God bless your families. God bless America. We'll talk to y'all again real soon, folks. Looking forward to it.